Okay. Let's hope it records. Are we ready for some more Wordsworth? And are you all getting ready to curl up with Frankenstein this weekend? Did you get ready? Yeah.
I've got to present my long essay draft for the first time for honors and everything this weekend.
Uh-oh.
And so after I turn that in,
Then you can take it. That's good.
then I'll be able to relax. And I'll be like, oh, Frankenstein, how nice.
This is fun. And, you know, if you have, I'm sure a lot of you, but Frankenstein is, part of Frankenstein is actually like travel literature. So it's really cool. You get to go to exotic places and all that stuff. Good stuff. Anyway, so we were looking at the Preface to Lyrical Ballads, and we are on page 307. And we already talked about how Wordsworth comes up with a new kind of poetic language and a new kind of poetic subject matter that he feels is more permanent, internal, durable, all that stuff we talked about. Now I said that he comes up with a new function for poetry, and he's going to show us why poetry is more necessary in a modern technological age where everybody's living in the city, everybody's crushed together. We actually need poetry more, not less, in our modern, again, industrialized, urbanized world. So let's look what he says. He says, I will not suffer a sense of false modesty, that's the beginning of the paragraph there, from asserting that I point my reader's attention to this mark of distinction, far less for the sake of these particular poems than for the general importance of the subject. The subject is indeed important, for the human mind is capable of being excited without the application of gross and violent stimulants. And he must have a very faint perception of its beauty and dignity who does not know this, and who does not further know that one being is elevated above another in proportion as he possesses this capability. It has therefore appeared to me that to endeavor to produce or enlarge this capability is one of the best services in which at any period a writer can be engaged, but this service, excellent at all times, is especially so at the present day. And I think we can make today's present day also work here. For a multitude of causes unknown to former times are now acting with a combined force to blunt the discriminating powers of the mind and, unfitting it for all voluntary exertion, to reduce it to a state of almost savage torpor. The most effective of these causes are the great national events which are daily taking place, and the increasing accumulation of men in cities, where the uniformity of their occupations produces a craving for extraordinary incident, which the rapid communication of intelligence hourly gratifies. To this tendency of life and manners, the literature and theatrical exhibitions of the country have conformed themselves. Right? And then he sums up by saying, the very top of the next page, when I think upon this degrading thirst after outrageous stimulation, I am almost ashamed to have spoken of the feeble effort with which I have endeavored to counteract it. Wow. Wow. Now, this has changed slightly in the sense that in the Industrial Revolution, what were lots of the jobs like in the city? What kind of work did you end up doing? In the fact, what's the problem with factory work? Good. Mind-numbing on, repetitive, do the same thing over and over again. Some of you have seen, I know Maria at least has seen Charlie Chaplin's movie Modern Times, where he keeps doing the same thing over and over, and he can't stop. He goes in his lunch break, and he keeps going like he can't stop, right? Yeah, you were there too, weren't you? Actually, yeah, that was fun. I've got a great response from all the students. I was like, wow, so Charlie is another generation. They call him Charlot in France. But anyway, what happens when you do that kind of work over and over and over again is it blunts your discriminating powers. Now, this is not discrimination like prejudice, but finding fine shades of difference between things. Now, basically, after you work like that all day, if you want entertainment, what do you want your entertainment to be like?
Super vivid,
Good,
exciting,
vivid.
dramatic.
They're crazy, right? On and on and on. Now, today, we would say what are happening to our movies? More and more what?
Action.
More and more action, special effects, explosions, all of that sort of stuff, right? We need it. We need more, what he calls outrageous stimulation. So the action movies have to become more violent and more crazy and more this and more that, more extreme, because our our perception has gotten dulled. We need to be shaken out of it. We don't want to listen to a string quartet, which is all about very fine shades of difference with lots of repetition that if you don't really know what you're listening to, it sounds like it might as well be coming out of an organ grinder. And we don't want that. We want something that's loud and heavy beating and knocking us over on the head. And he says this is what's happening, right? It's blunting, it's led to, I love that phrase, savage torpor. Now, that's really kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? Like, because torpor means you're not moving, torpid, you're lethargic. Whereas savage, but here it's a savage, or you're almost savagely torpid, which is very strange, but what's happening is that nothing can get a rise out of us. We've become so beaten down that we crave not after beauty and subtlety, but after what he calls extraordinary incident. And by the way, it's really funny because, if you had to choose probably the most famous British poet, it would be Shakespeare, right? And what genre did Shakespeare write? Plays. But, generally speaking, England is not always famous for their plays. There's a long, and in this time period, they were still doing plays. There's always plays. But many of them were almost like we think of modern plays with like doing anything to get a rise out of the audience. And then a little bit later, like when we get to the end of the 19th century, we start getting Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw. We get a little different kind of play. But at this time, they're not. There's no great plays that we're studying today from this period, even though they were putting them on all the time. What do you think, Marie? Oh, yeah, he's cool. Oh, there we go. It's been fun. George Bernard Shaw. Nobody ever called him George. It was either Bernard or George Bernard, but he didn't like George. Probably sounded too common or something like that. So this is what I do. And this is kind of neat about the Romantics, right? The Romantics are very democratic, right? We're moving away from aristocracy. But they're, in a way, creating a new aristocracy that I would call an aristocracy of refinement. So the best people are not necessarily the ones that have the money and are going out hunting and all. Who are the people that are the best now? What does that mean? An aristocracy of refinement. What do you think I mean by that? Good. People that are more in touch with their feelings, that respond to it, that are sensitive. This is a different kind of aristocracy that he's calling for. And he's saying that, why do we need poetry? Because poetry will rehumanize us. Open us again to the subtle kind of goodness, truth, and beauty. So it don't always have to be smacked over the head all the time, right? And so that's where we're enlarging this capability, right? This capability is the ability to be moved without gross and violent stimulants. We can almost use our modern meaning of the word gross there, even though that's not what he's thinking. He's thinking gross as in large. But here, anything to get a rise out of people. Right? And you know that, like something on Disney Channel, when they have to resort to potty jokes, it's like, come on, don't you have any more refinement than that? Don't you have a little higher esteem of your child audience, that they don't need crude jokes to make them laugh, right? You can find something more subtle, right? And that's what he hopes his poetry will do. Make us human again. Human again! Oh, human again. You know what that is? What's that? That is different, but what's special about that song?
Oh, it's the song that they're singing and they're so excited.
Well, you might not even know this. That's an added song. When they put out the it wasn't in the original theatrical release. Yeah. It's pretty cool, and they added it in. So there'd be a whole generation that, those movies came out before you were born. Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Little Mermaid. It's amazing. Seems like yesterday for me. Yesterday. You like that song? Yeah, you like the Beatles. You like all that stuff. Okay, let's turn now to page 310. So that is the new the new function for poetry. Now let's look at a new definition of the poet. And words are like asking what poetry is the same question as asking what the poet is. And so he explains here. We've got a little in what's that? What are they? Brackets. That's our editor giving us the subtitle. It's not in the original. And he says, taking up the subject then upon general grounds, I ask, what is meant by the word poet? What is a poet? To whom does he address himself? And what language is to be expected from him? And again, he's now going to redefine the poet. This is no longer the 18th century poet, Alexander Pope or something. This is a new definition of what the poet is, almost ontologically, you know. He is a man speaking to men. Well, that sounds kind of weird, but in the older days, a lot of times the poet was part of a coterie, like a set apart group, where they would, and this was true of, you know, could even be true of somebody like John Donne, until he started writing for religious reasons. It's for a small group. Poets write for other poets. And sometimes, don't people say that now? Maria, you're taking poetry classes. There are some that still do that, okay? But this is a new idea. The poet is a man speaking to men. I'm a real person. I'm speaking the real language of men. And I want to communicate directly with people. I'm not only writing for a little group of people and not caring about anybody else. A man, it is true, endued with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness. Okay? And this is different. Not somebody necessarily that steeped himself in the classics or that has all of those kinds of skills. Now we're talking about somebody that has a kind of sensibility and enthusiasm, but again, not like we think wild, a kind of enthusiasm that can be touched by small and supple things. Goes on to explain, who has a greater knowledge of human nature and a more comprehensive soul. That's wonderful. A soul that can draw. It's like the word synthesis we keep using, comprehensive. That doesn't just mean it understands, but it's comprehensive. It takes in everything. It's not only interested in one thing, it wants to take in all that the world has to offer. That's the kind of soul the poet has. Very different. That are supposed to be common among mankind. In other words, they have this to a more of a degree. The way this is put is that the poet differs not in kind, but in degree from other men. And so I'm not like a different, set off from everybody, like my own class, like often happens. I'm just like everybody else, but I have more of it. So I'm sensitive like other people, but I'm more sensitive. Things come to me. It's a different way to look at the poetic genius. He's not in his own class cut off. He is like all of us, but he has something more, an X factor, I guess we would say that today. And he's explaining what it is that he has. He says, a man pleased with his own passions and volitions, and who rejoices more than other men in the spirit of life that is in him. When he's happy, he's more happy than other people. I lost my place again. Sorry, I lost it. Delighting to contemplate similar volitions and passions as manifested in the goings-on of the universe, and habitually impelled to create them where he does not find them. I seek joy everywhere, and if I don't find it, I bring that joy to that. To these qualities, he has added a disposition to be affected more than other men by absent things as if they were present. That's why so much of romantic poetry is a kind of recollection or memory. Right? A romantic poet can get as much joy from remembering a moment of closeness with nature than a regular person actually being there. They're so sensitive. There are certain movie scenes that if I run through them in my mind, I might start crying. Like the famous telephone scene in It's a Wonderful Life. You know what I'm talking about? When he's trying to push off the girl and he ends up loving her at the same time. It's just, certain things, if I run them through my mind, I will re-experience them. That's what the romantic poet has. Doesn't need the gross stimulation. Just remembering it will bring it back. And that's what Tintern Abbey is going to do very much in a moment. An ability of conjuring up in himself passions which are indeed far from being the same as those produced by real events, yet, especially in those parts of the general sympathy which are pleasing and delightful, do more nearly resemble the passions produced by real events than anything which, from the motions of their own minds merely, other men are accustomed to feel in themselves. So I can bring up emotions. They're not fully there, but I can, because I'm so much in touch with myself, with nature, with feeling, with joy. All of these things they're just a fuller, richer person. And maybe you meet people like that sometimes. Like that would be, I don't know, like a more romantic understanding of what the ideal Christian is. Like so there are some cultures where the ideal Christian is the person, the humanitarian, serving on 1,000 different committees and doing good things and helping people and whatnot, and that's a really good person. But sometimes those people, especially like older, even in something like Jane Austen, sometimes they're cut off from other people. Like they do things and they do good deeds and they're helping all that. But I think a lot of people today think of a Christian as someone who is so in touch with themselves and God that they just give off love and joy to other people. Does that make sense? A kind of a different, maybe a more romantic way of thinking of a Christian, rather than somebody that's in charge of every committee in the world or something. Right? And I don't want to make fun of those people. We need those people. Okay, but that's just a different understanding. Okay. He has acquired a greater readiness and power in expressing what he thinks and feels, and especially those thoughts and feelings which by his own choice or from the structure of his own mind arise in him without immediate external excitement. Wow. To be able to do that, to be so sensitive that you can be, again, moved just by the memory of something. That's what the romantic poet is like. If you jump to page 311, the last paragraph on page 311, go 3 paragraphs from where we were just talking. Okay. From time immemorial, going all the way back to Aristotle, though really more Horace, there was always this idea that poetry should do 2 things. It should what and what? You heard it? You've heard it before. Say it again. Yeah, exactly, right. Teach and delight, teach and please. Those 2 things that poetry should do. It's got a didactic function of teaching, often moral lessons, but it also pleases at the same time. What did they say? Something et utile. What is the Latin? Dulce. Thank you. Dulce et utile. Dulce means sweet, like dulce et leche. Dulce et utile, and utile is still our word utilitarian. It has utility. So the 2 together. All right. Now, the Romantics are going to still agree with that. But whereas the 18th century would have focused more on the teaching aspect, he wants to focus more on the pleasing. And he wants to focus not only on how romantic poetry pleases, but how the poet himself is in a state of pleasure. So that pleasure, we're not talking about, we're talking about a deeper set pleasure, right? And so he says here, it's the beginning of the paragraph, nor let this necessity of producing immediate pleasure be considered as a degradation of the poet's art. He doesn't look down on that. The poet should bring pleasure. That's part of poetry, and we shouldn't be embarrassed of that it should be beautiful. Now, there are some stuff that I like about Stephen Sondheim, but he's sort of infamous for saying, I refuse to write hummable tunes. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, he's the one that did a little night music. And some of them are actually hummable, but just generally speaking, he tried to break away from all of that. Like a little night music has really beautiful songs that are very powerful, but they're not exactly hummable like Roger and Hammerstein. Even something like Into the Woods. Some of them are pretty singable, but again, it's a different kind of thing. Well, Wordsworth is not... What's that? You like him?
He was humming Into the Woods.
Is it? Oh, yeah, Into the Woods. Yeah, that one, that just kind of gets you in there. And sometimes he has that. I mean, certainly Sending the Clowns is probably the most hummable tune from that. But again, it's different. But Wordsworth saying, no, I'm not embarrassed. Part of my job is to bring pleasure. It should sound beautiful. It should sound pretty, right? Okay. It is far otherwise. It is the necessity of giving pleasure. It is an acknowledgement of the beauty of the universe. An acknowledgement the more sincere because it is not formal but indirect. It is a task light and easy to him who looks at the world in the spirit of love. Further, it is an homage paid to the native and naked dignity of man. What a great phrase. By loving pleasure, I'm saying that this is dignity. We are the creature who laughs. Now, sometimes we're the creature who laughs in an evil way, but we're also the creature who laughs with pure pleasure. And that's part of who we are. To the grand elementary principle of pleasure by which he knows and feels and lives and moves. Wow, in him we live and move and have our being. Right? We have no sympathy but what is propagated by pleasure. So he wants his poetry to pay homage to the fact that we are creatures who love and who laugh and who have feelings and who seek after joy and seek after pleasure in the good sense of the word. So again, all of this it's a different way of looking at the poet. He says, look at the difference. This is now page 312, about 2/3 of the way down the page. He contrasts the man of science, more like the 18th century, with the poet. He says, we're in the middle of his paragraph. The man of science seeks truth as a remote and unknown benefactor. He cherishes and loves it in his solitude. And so, it's the man of science seeks truth, but it's often a truth that's cut off from humanity. It stands on its own, and it's not part of the joy and the pleasure and the. See, this is. Again, we talked before about the clockwork universe of Newton. It's the idea that the universe no longer has anything to do with us. It works on its own. It's a machine. It's a clockwork, and we can study it. But oh, you look. Oh, you call I never get pulled because I'm going crazy over here. But keep it up. He says the poet, though, singing a song in which all human beings join with him, rejoices in the presence of truth as our visible friend and hourly companion. You trying to do that in your poetry? Really? Okay. It's all part. That's probably why you like that folk music too, because I think folk music tries to do that. It wants to be part of the folk, the people, right? And you like folk music too, or something, right? But it's trying to be part of all that which is human, most human. Poetry is a great. These are the great things. You know, when you're a young English major, you always want to have a book that has all sorts of quotes. Do you have one of those? Yeah, commonplace book, I think they call it. Oh, you do? Okay. This is the kind of quotes you might want to write in there. He says, poetry is the breath and finer spirit of all knowledge. Yeah, beautiful. That's the kind of thing you want to write down, right? It is the impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all science. Emphatically may it be said of the poet, as Shakespeare hath said of man, that he looks before and after. He is the rock of defense, the poet, of human nature. He's an upholder and preserver, carrying everywhere with him relationship and love. That's a high thing to live up to. In spite of difference of soil and climate, of language, manners, laws, customs, in spite of things silently gone out of mind and things violently destroyed, the poet binds together by passion and knowledge the vast empire of human society as it is spread over the whole earth and over all time. There comes that idea of synthesis again, of unity, of fusion, of joining, of making all one. Very bottom of the page, poetry is the first and last of all knowledge. It is as immortal as the heart of man. If the labors of men of science should ever create any material revolution, direct or indirect, in our condition, and in the impression which we habitually receive, the poet will sleep then no more than at present, but he will be ready to follow the steps of the man of science, not only in those general indirect effects, but he will be at his side carrying sensation into the midst of the objects of science. That means if science ever becomes so much a part of who we are as human beings, then the poet can write an ode to a computer as well. Right? Then you can bring it in, because that's the job of the poet, to humanize everything, allow us to access it, to absorb it, to be in a dialogue, in a relationship even with it. This is all part of the new function of poetry, a new, better word, a new mission or even ministry of the poet is to do these things. Now, one last thing, and this will prepare us for Tintern Abbey. It's on page 314, and it's the section that's got emotion, recollecting, and tranquility. Oh, go ahead.
I was still trying to think it out. So is that part of the perception thing where you turn inward and then you're projecting your own feelings out onto the things that you see and you're writing about? Like with
They are. That's always a little part of it. That always is a little bit a part of Wordsworth. That like, maybe just a good way to put it is, a lot of poets say, I can't start a poem unless I'm inspired. But Wordsworth would say, I can't finish the poem unless I continue to be inspired. I need to be in a place of pleasure, a bower, where, again, the thoughts that are inside of me can be projected. It's kind of a two-way street. But ultimately, it's got to come from within.
So it's not that when you say he's humanizing everything, it's
right.
not that he's giving humanity to those things. He's
right.
projecting his own humanity on
Right, and then allowing us to be able to do it as well. The poet by lending his own humanity to it allows us to then receive it and humanize it, and now it becomes part of us. And that's again that is a ministry. Wordsworth was very serious about that. It's funny because generally speaking, the 18th century man is more public, then Romantic is more private. But for Romantic would say, I might be in private, but I'm doing something very public. So I might be in my bower, I might be in the Lake District, not in London. I don't want to be in London. But people in London will be humanized and rejuvenated and refreshed by this. It's kind of neat. Okay, now, it's really funny. I don't know if you noticed the full title is Lyrical Ballads and a few other poems. And actually, Tintern Abbey, which is the most famous poem from it, is a few other poems. It's a little bit different than the Lyrical Ballads. And he describes what he's doing right here in this part towards the end. He says, I have said that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. We already saw that. But then he says something that's almost the opposite. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. It almost seems like the opposite, but it comes up, but here I am, I'm in a state of tranquility, and then the word, it is memory, but we like to use the word recollection here, because you know that goes back to play. Do you know the Greek word? It's anamnesis. Okay, ana means, it can mean again or from above. Like you probably know that Jesus said you must be born again, and that can mean born again or born from above. That word ana means both, but it can mean again or from above. But ana and nemesis, can you think of an English word that sounds like that? Well, but it's mn. Mnemonic. Okay, you're right, but it's what is a mnemonic device? It helps you remember. And Mnemosyne, because the M is silent, but it's MN. Mnemosyne is the goddess of memory. And she's also the goddess, and that's why the Iliad was inspired by the muses who are coming from memory, right? Because remember, it's an oral tradition. So it's pretty kind of cool when you think about it. But, so, anamnesis means memory, but it almost means to remember up. Almost literally, to remember again or remember up, right? Why does Socrates and Plato, why do you use the Socratic method? What did he help that little slave boy to do? Why was he able to teach him math? Good. This idea was that our soul pre-existed, the pre-existence of the soul. That idea, which is going to come up in the intimations, though, that we'll look at next week. This idea that our soul existed in heaven before we were born. And if our soul existed in heaven, then it perceived the forms, all the true things about everything. Right? So, when you're using question and answer, what I'm really it's mystical actually. What I'm trying to do is help you to recollect, in other words, collect up, bring back up, literally, bring back up your memory of what you saw in the pre-existent state. Because there was a time when you knew mathematics, and I just need, teaching is actually partly remembering. It's kind of a wild concept. Yeah. Who's that tall guy in the honors college? No. The other tall guy that you. Yeah, Joel. I won't even say it because it's probably too horrible to remember. But he's a cool guy. But he once came to my office and he just wanted to fight with me about that idea about recollection. I don't know why, but he's like that sometimes, isn't he? I try to convince him. Okay, it's all right. I don't know why he's all up in arms about that for some reason. He's funny, that guy. Anyway, very strange. So here, that's why the word recollection it does mean memory, but it's a stronger word than memory. It doesn't just mean remember. It's almost like I'm literally calling it back up and re-experiencing it. This is what we're talking about, right? And some people would argue, like debates over the Lord's Supper, would say that, because for Protestants, especially if you're a low Protestant, like a Baptist, it's a remembrance or a recollection. And a lot of others, will say, well, but that recollection is a stronger word. It's like a literally re-experiencing of the Last Supper. So again, because people have very different definitions of that. I just reviewed a book by Peter Kraft, who had a book on the Eucharist, but it is a Socratic dialogue, or I guess technically a trilogue, between Tolkien, who was Catholic and so believed in the transubstantiation, and Lewis, who was an Anglican and so he believed in what they call real presence, and Billy Graham, who was a Baptist, so it's more remembrance. And it's pretty good. It's a really neat thing. If you're interested, email me. I'll email you the review in case you want to read the book. It's pretty cool. Okay, so so I'm in a state of tranquility, and now I'm remembering the past. But again, it's not a passive memory; it is a re-experiencing of it. The emotion is contemplated till, by a species of reaction, the tranquility gradually disappears, and an emotion kindred to that which was before the subject of contemplation is gradually produced and does itself actually exist in the mind. So, in a moment of tranquility, I recollect my memory of, say, Tintern Abbey, and what happens as I do that is the tranquility slowly disappears and is replaced by the emotion I had in the original experience, so that I'm really re-experiencing it. Okay? Oh, okay. I mean, or are you thinking when he talks about that, the poet is a catalyst in tradition and individual talent? Or transferring it? Oh, then you two experience the same emotion. It's been transferred to you in a way. That's interesting. Is there a specific word? I'll have to ask him. I'll have to think about that. Oh, that's right. Not the elegies. I don't like that. This would be cool, you know. Yeah, someday, you know, if Bolson disappears, you'll have to sit down and reconstruct it from your notes, just like Aristotle. I can do it.
I had a separate notebook with the crazy things he said.
Oh, the crowd, that's wonderful. He thinks he's going to break you away from Tolkien poetry. He's not going to succeed, but he tries. He gets him so frustrated. It's great. Have you had a Boston class too? Oh, you did good. I thought so. Yeah, it's great fun. Crazy guy. He's like not on campus much this time. He's a couple days a week. Yeah, I think he's here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Yeah, so we're helping. Of course, his kids, his two girls, are at home doing all. You know, it's just. I'm just so glad I'm in a part of my life where I don't have kids right now. I can't even think these poor professors that are trying, or anybody trying to balance your own kids who are learning online and crazy. So anyway, I'm okay right now. Anyway, where was it? So, okay, in this mood, successful composition generally begins, and in a mood similar to this, it is carried on. We need to stay there. But the emotion of whatever kind and in whatever degree, from various causes, is qualified by various pleasures, so that in describing any passions whatsoever, which are voluntarily described, the mind will upon the whole be in a state of enjoyment. So you need to stay in that mood of pleasure and enjoyment. And even if what you're remembering is painful, it's still pleasureful to remember it and bring it back. And again, it's that's why for Wordsworth, he doesn't just remember a memory, he feels it viscerally along his veins. Right? He experiences it that way. And it's great. Let's look at Tintern. It's on page 299. As you see, the full title is Composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour July 13, 1798. How is that for a mouthful? But everybody just calls it Tintern Abbey. And I've heard a lot of Texans who say Tintern Abbey. Please pronounce the T. I've met some Texans who say Vietnamese. Instead of Vietnamese, it's Vietnamese. The Y? Wait. Oh, the Y. That's in the Lake District. The YMCA. Yeah, the Y, it's a river. Yeah, it's a Y river that runs through the Lake District that you saw in the book there. Oh, Ashley, did you see the book yet? Pass it on. I don't know if you saw it yet. This is a book that shows you what the Lake District looks like. It's actually not that far from Wales. So it's more towards, if this is England, it's more towards the west of England. Not that far. It's a little bit past the Cotswolds where Stratford upon Avon is, and it gets very close to Wales. in a beautiful area. So it's kind of, and it's about halfway. It's like central West England, near the border of Wales. Oh, that's right. So you were close to that area. Okay. Did you climb Mount Snowdon? Because if you read the prelude, he climbs Mount Snowdon towards the end of the prelude. It talks about it. That's cool. And you know why Wales is important? Because there's a city, a whole town in Wales that are all fans of Dr. Bolson's poetry. Did he tell you that? Yeah. He's like, yeah, we told him 1,000 times. And he's been there and all that sort of stuff. So. Oh, that's wild. It's insane language. You know who else loves Wales is Dr. Davis, if you've ever had him for history. He's another big Welsh guy. Wales. Oh, that's right. Yeah, he is on the sabbatical. Yeah. So, all right. So this is, but it's important that it's composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. So Wordsworth is not in Tintern Abbey are the ruins of an old abbey in the Lake District, but he's not actually there. He's on a mountaintop, and the mountains aren't super high there, but he's on a mountain that's overlooking Tintern Abbey. Right? So this is a mountaintop vision. And romantics love to have mountaintop vision because you go to the top and you see the whole world in a new perspective. Now, is there a famous character in the Bible who went to the top of a mountain and got a vision of a land? Is it Moses? Yeah, and he went to the top. It's either sometimes it's called Mount Nebo or Mount Pisgah. It's part of the same. And we often speak of a Pisgah vision from the top of the mountain. What does God allow him to see? Good, the land of promise, the land of Canaan, which of course, unfortunately, he's not going to get to go, but at least he sees it. He gets a vision. Though I assured my children when they were young, he did actually sort of get to go to the Holy Land when? Hey, very good, the Transfiguration. And I guess it's true, his foot didn't touch ground because he was sort of floating above Moses and Elijah. So I remember consoling my children. They go, don't worry, Moses did, in a sense, get to go there at the Transfiguration, which I love. See, the painting by Raphael is one of my favorite paintings of the Transfiguration. I even saw when I was in the Vatican a mosaic version of that. The same painting. I don't know if he made the mosaic, but it's a mosaic, which is so hard to do. Okay. So, from the top, he's looking down, and he is revisiting physically, but of course he's revisiting psychically, going back. And basically, for the last 5 years, he's been, from his point of view, imprisoned in London. Right? But you don't want to be in London. So he's been far away from this place, and now he's returning. Right? Returning to a place that has had significance in his life throughout his life. Right? He was there when he was very young, when he was a little bit older, when he was a little bit older, and now there's been a 5-year gap, and he's coming back. Wordsworth was born in 1770, so he's actually 28 years old. So he's not that old yet. He became nostalgic very, very young. Are you nostalgic already? Yeah. Sorry. Oh, good. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Right.
It's very much similar to the Kierkegaard discarded space. So, like, if you resigned to the finite, so then by virtue of observing, you gain the infinite. So that you can just then regain the finite. So that you can live like a normal person in the world, but with this more universal mindset. So it's very much what Wordsworth is trying to do, like trying to take the natural and like this more supernatural quality, having the finite and the infinite like sort of conflated into one, not losing one or the other, but so that you can understand the world as it properly is, as both body and soul.
With joy, because it's all this idea of like the mindset of pleasure, but the night of faith has to have that joy.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Maybe a little bit of the tree of life, where you've got to bring together nature and grace and all that sort of stuff. The Malik one, the tree of life. Okay. You wrote a song about that? Oh, cool. Send it to me. Send me the link. Oh, that's neat. What a crazy crew we have here. I just love it. Is that right? There was a guy here before, Philip Jacob wrote a whole song about East of Eden. Like, you do it? Oh my gosh. It's wild. There we go. Good stuff to listen to on the weekend. I like that. Wow. So he's coming back, and I think we should all have a place like Tintern Abbey. What I mean by that, do any of you have like some special place where, let's say, your parents visited there once a year for like most of your childhood? Was there a place like that? What was it? Was that?
So we would alternate. We would go to either Myrtle Beach with mom's family
Oh.
or Edisto with dad's family every summer.
Oh, good. Okay. So why is it? What function does that play in your life when you're growing up from a kid?
It was our vacation time. It was like peaceful, and you were with your family, and it was like where we would go and be allowed to do like super fun stuff.
Isn't it great? And you look forward to it? And those places that you went to, every time you went there, they were pretty much the same, right? They weren't changing. It wasn't like a middle of a city or something. It's a natural enough that it's not changing. It's a set place. But of course, every time you go there, you're what? You're older. You're different. And I really think it's important to have something like that to mark our own growth against. But when I was a kid, we had a retreat up in the Catskill Mountains every summer that we would go to, and it's like you mark your own growth. I guess it would be a little bit like do any of your parents actually do that thing where they had a ruler where they marked if you got taller? Door frame, yeah. Just something like that. Did you have one of those? They didn't grow. They just stopped. They stopped. They stopped at the doggy door. No, she's not that tall. Not that short. There's a song. Anybody ever see South Pacific? You know South Pacific? Pressy, you know that? 101 pounds of fun. That's my little honey bun. And he says, she's my little sweetie pie, only 60 inches high. Every inch is packed with dynamite. Okay, so 5 feet. You said you're 5 feet or 5'1"? 5.5. 5 feet. Oh, you're getting that little half inch there. You're trying. Okay. 60 inches right there. Boom. Okay. Still not short enough to be in Wizard of Oz, though. You're not that short. I'm having fun today. Anyway, so 5 years have passed, he says, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. Now, right away, that's a very romantic way of saying things in terms of romantic perception. Because, he says, 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters. Okay, 5 years is 5 years, right? I mean, 5 years is 5 years. But, why does he say that there are 5 long summers, but with the length of 5 long winters? Good. And they're long because of his perception of them. Where he was, caught up in the city. So right away, time takes on a new meaning. And it seems longer and longer and longer. I don't you all remember when you were really little, the summers felt like it lasted forever? You didn't feel that way? Oh, maybe I didn't think about it that way, but I mean, it's just great. It's like, oh, you never. Oh, okay. Oh, that's cruel. Tell you, Mom, we're not living in Japan, man. Just give us a summer, Not giving us work to do all the time, but I guess it worked. It worked out.
She would have run out of books much quicker if we weren't doing school all the time.
Oh, there we go.
So that was not okay.
I love it, right? So anyway, he's going back, right? And he's revisiting and he's describing the beauty of nature, and all of it is welcoming him back. But again, he's looking at it from above, so it's not there. In other words, it's removed from him, like his memory, that he's going to call back, that he's going to call up. So it's just kind of neat that he's not actually there, but he's looking at it from the mountaintop. Maybe that's why Jesus did the Sermon on the Mount. I don't know, but from the mountaintop. But let's pick up. We'll move a little faster on page 300, and we'll pick up at line 23. So he says, these beauteous forms. Now, by beauteous forms, he just means the whole Wye Valley, Tintern Abbey, all of these beautiful things he's looking at. And he says, these beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood, and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration. Wordsworth is the poet of tranquil restoration. The Wye Valley, and more specifically his memories of this place, what ministry did it perform for Wordsworth when he was in the city? Say it again? It restored him, right? It came to him and brought, and in a sense rehumanized him, reconnected him, right? He felt cut off, in prison, right? In again, amid the din of towns and cities, in lonely rooms, the memory comes back to him. What is it? In the roaring traffic's boom, in the silence of my lonely room, you know, I think of you. I almost was going to say it. It's a Cole Porter song. I think of you night and day. See, you got it. Classic. Okay. You know, you've heard it, right? Night and day, you're the one. And again, all that sort of stuff. It comes back to him, even when he's in a world that seems to have no joy, no humanity, no connection, no sympathy. It comes back, and so it's not like a landscape to a blind man's eye. No, we can still see it. It's far away, but it still comes to him in a real way. And I love how he says it, felt in the blood and felt along the heart. That's a very strange way of saying it. But again, it's that word visceral. When we say we feel something viscerally, you know what our viscera is? It's like all of our veins and nerves and all the stuff that runs through us. You feel it, right, on it. Like listening to Wagner, whether or not you want to. I happen to like Wagner and feel it viscerally, right? That I remember, there's a lot of violent movies, but what was that guy's name? Paul Verhoeven. I don't know if you know who that is, Maria, but he's the one that made the original RoboCop, and he made Total Recall. And there's something about his violence that you feel it. I mean, I feel like I'm being shot when I watch his stuff. I think he's from the Netherlands. He's Dutch. And he also did that other crazy one where the soldiers are fighting those giant insect bug things. That's it, Starsky. He made that too. Again, those movies are all like that. You feel it. It's like, I'm tired after I watch this stuff. Ooh. But here, it's like it has a presence on him. Yeah? Well, good. How it does, isn't it? I mean, we don't know how to pray, but the Spirit prays through us with, it's a beautiful phrase, with groans too deep, or sighs too deep for words, but with groans too deep for words. 1 Corinthians, I think. But that's kind of what you were referencing before. And also, I would say, too, that, if you talk to somebody that, that is more charismatic, a lot of times, they're not just saying that I felt the Spirit, but I felt the presence of the Spirit. In other words, it's not just I felt good or I heard a voice in my ear, but I felt the weight of the Spirit. Now, some of you that are really romantic, I mean, did any of you, I remember as a kid, feeling, being in bed and feeling something almost like demonic pressing down, and I would be like, saying every prayer I knew in the book and reciting everything. And so, I mean, but it's a weight, it's a felt weight, a kind of warfare. Luther certainly felt that all the time. And here, so again, these are not just memories, okay? They're not passive memories. They are re-experiences, recollection, recollecting, bringing it back up. So he says, and it passes into my purer mind. What's that? These are one of these wonderful things, like let me not to the marriage of true minds. Thank you. Mid impediment. What does that mean? The marriage of true minds. Well, we can say and we know, and purer mind. It's something deeper than our regular mind, passing into the person that is Him. Right? It's Watchman Nee and other people talk about how we're tripartite, not body and soul, but body, soul, and spirit. And they talk about how the Spirit often speaks to our spirit, which is something deeper than our soul. Our soul is the emotional, intellectual, and volitional, in other words, having to do with will. And the Spirit is something even deeper than the soul. And the Spirit, deep, cries out to deep. This is actually an incredibly mystic, it's one of the most mystical poems in English. but it's just ordinary, right? We find the mystical in the ordinary. Like somebody like Julian of Norwich, or any of the mystics, or like who's the other one? St. John of the Cross and Bernard of Clairvaux. A lot of times, just the simplest things. What are the Catholics? Teresa of Lisieux, I think it's pronounced. That's more popular with Catholics. I've read about her too. But again, finding the beauty and grace in the simple things, right? And despite writing very disturbing stories, Flannery O'Connor does that as well. Finds grace in the most unlikely of places. Most unlikely of places, right? So, feelings too of unremembered pleasure. What the heck is an unremembered pleasure? All my life I hear this song. Should old acquaintance be forgot? What does this mean? I do not know what this means. How can you forget it? Thank you. That's Billy Crystal. That's really from the end of When Harry Met Sally. I just love that. Anyway. Whose favorite? Oh, really? I always like that. It's that movie is like 30 years old now. I think it was 89 or somewhere around there. It's over 30 years old. Pretty amazing. But yeah, I love that. I showed it to my kids, forgetting that it's all about sex, but we still enjoyed it. You're watching me. Man, some of the movies I grew up with in the 80s I've forgotten how much cursing there is in those movies sometimes. Yeah. The same thing is like, what the heck? It's like, man, maybe I should have. All right, we'll watch it, And you know what movie I watched with my kids because they both went to HSPVA? Fame. Have you ever seen the original Fame? Oh my God, it is so foul-mouthed and but it's good. The remake of Fame is like kid stuff compared to the original one, which is really, but it's a good movie. But wow. And somehow we let the kids watch it because we figured it was educational, right? So you can get away with that, right? It's about School of Performing Arts. But anyway, probably. Anyway, warp them for life. But anyway, so what is an unremembered pleasure? How can you remember that you didn't remember? But somehow we know what that means. It's something again so deep. I don't remember it, and yet I remember it at some deeper level. Something that is part of who I am. Such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Right? For a while, do people still use that phrase, random acts of kindness? All the youth pastors were using that for a while. Instead of random acts of violence, random acts of kindness. But again, sometimes it is in those random acts of kindness that we do see a deeper capacity for goodness inside of us. Are you still not sure about original sin, Maria? You have a good. I've been keeping an eye on you. Okay. Just say original sin, but maybe not total depravity or something like that. You can use that. Whoa! Oh my gosh! You can become Anglican? I would see you as Anglican, maybe just because you're a disciple of Bolston. But But that makes everybody happy. Yeah. Or you can join one of my favorites. It's called the Christian and Missionary Alliance. Have you ever heard of a CMA church? It's the non-denominational denomination. It's wonderful. CMA. There's a lot of missionaries around the world and all. But okay. Well, you got to sit down. I got to get the whole story here. You got to come sit down. I haven't seen. Anyway, there's always something going on with this one. Anyway, oh boy. Nor less I trust to them. Again, the them is still the memories. To them I have owed another gift of aspect more sublime. That blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. Okay, now, when he says unintelligible world, he doesn't mean College Station. Okay? This is one of the few, little bit more, this is where A&M is, one of the more arcane references. The unintelligible world. I wonder if Maria can guess what that means. It's actually Platonic. Okay, well, our world is the unintelligible world. So the world of the forms is the intelligible world. Okay, so he's being Platonic here. So in that mood, our world of shadows, now he's not saying it's all shadows, but our world that is just a reflection of the intelligible world, the world where the real things are. Beauty, goodness, truth with capital letters, the forms. In that mood, as he meditates, and this is a very meditative poem. This is very Zen, but it's Christian Zen rather than Buddhist Zen. Okay, it's very Zen. And you understand, what is the point of the riddle? What is the sound of one hand clapping? Right? And of course, Bart Simpson came up with the answer to that. But the point of the riddle is you're not supposed to solve it. But as you think about it, it takes you out of thought. Right? Anyway. It's good. I like that. Once you can't stop it. You can't stop it. If you were Greek, you would snap. You always have to snap. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I didn't think about that. Yeah. Right? But you understand the point of those Zen riddles. There's a word for codon. It's not coming to me. But anyway, there's a word for it. But the point of those riddles is to tease you out of thought. You're not supposed to solve them. You're supposed to get you out. And here, it's a meditate. As he meditates on those, as he re-experiences and feels it again, the heavy and weary weight of this just purely physical world, especially the city, but anywhere, it starts to be lightened. Right? The heaviness and weariness that drags. Think about Plato too. When your wings become so heavy, they get dragged and you get dragged down to earth and you end up in a body. Right? Before you can soar again. That's the Phaedrus. What's that? Yes, the Phaedrus. Before you can soar again and grow your wings and whatnot. But it drags you down to earth. You like that one? I like that. Yeah. It is good. By the way, does anybody know what skole means in Greek? Which is where the word school comes from? It's leisure. Remember, a couple weeks ago when I talked about that book, Leisure is the Basis of Culture? Well, one of the things I learned from that book is skole means leisure, right? And what he says is, there is no word for work in Greek. And so Aristotle says in Nicomachean Ethics that we fight wars so we can have, you know that. It's towards the end of the Nicomachean. We fight war so we can have peace. And we are a skole so we can have skole. Now, in Greek, is the opposite. Like we say UN, and it's the alpha privative. It's called the right? So we are not at leisure so that we can have leisure. And of course, he means work, but there's not even a word. The word he uses is not leisure.
So I told you about the podcast I listened to.
Oh, yeah.
My FOS assignment 2 weeks ago. The Simone.
Wheel, yeah.
Thing,
Yeah.
The study to learn attention and prayer and whatnot. That was the podcast series. It's called Cafe Skole.
Oh, great.
And so
Okay.
then one of the prompts I had to answer was, how can you make your school work less work and more school leisure because of the meaning of Skole?
Oh, that's great.
I remembered it, but yeah.
We're doing that. We're interested. We need an active that active passivity that's so strong in Wordsworth, that leisure. So as he meditates, it puts him into a mood. The romantics have to be in the right mood or state to compose. And he calls it that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Wow. This is mystical. You don't think it because it's such a simple poem, right? And again, it's like your diction is so much like Wordsworth. You're not writing blank verse, but the diction is very similar. It's pretty cool. That's it. When we are, everything is lightened and we become a living soul. Almost, it's a little bit. I mean, you know what those Buddhist monks up on Tibet are trying to do? Have you ever heard of astral projection, where they leave their bodies? In fact, you've all heard of the famous Shangri-La. Shangri-La, they call it Shambhala, right? And Shangri-La is in some of those, it's the place you go. You make your little mandala with your pictures out of sand and all, and your astral body goes there. You don't go there literally, to this place that's beyond. Here, he's doing it, but here's the difference. To me, speaking as a Christian, the problem with Buddhism is the Buddhist conception of heaven is beyond pain, but it's also beyond what? Yeah, pleasure and joy. And it's extinction. I don't know if you said that before, but moksha, nirvana, means when you blow out the candle and it's gone. Blow out the flame and it's gone. Right? So what's neat about this, and this is why I say it's Christian, it in one sense sounds like Zen Buddhism, but it is with joy, and the deep joy that Jesus, you were referring to before. Peace I give to you, not as the world. I give you the peace that surpasses all understanding. Right? A lot of you know that, right? Shalom means peace, but not peace in the sense of the absence of violence, but a deeper set peace that undergirds everything, that can't be moved by coronaviruses and all sorts of things like that. Right? So here, all of this happens, but it happens with the power of harmony and again the deep power of joy. Isn't that wonderful? And again, that word suspended is very important for the Romantics too. There's that moment where you're just hanging in suspension, and that's when it all comes to you. When the weight of the memory, but the good kind of weight, like the weight of glory that C.S. Lewis does, quoting St. Paul, that we can't bear this weight of glory. It's a different kind of heaviness. And he sees into the life of things. It's visionary. And he has his memories of Tintern Abbey, his intercourse with nature, that he can thank for that because it is given him. It's in that sense, again, do you know what it's called in something like TM, Transcendental Meditation? They give you a what to think about. You know what it's called? A mantra. Okay? And now be careful, because some of TI, Transcendental TM, is religion. Okay? They might give you a Hindu name, but you can use Jesus as your mantra. What is the most famous prayer in Orthodoxy? Lapsed girl. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist even saying it. I was channeling your parents. Good, they call it the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That's the full and the shorter versions. But do you know how the monks would often do it when they recited it or said it in their head? Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You know what they would do? She's showing it right there. They would breathe in through your nose, because if you're going to do meditation, you have to breathe in through your nose, which is hard when you live in Texas and your sinuses are always a mess. But you breathe in through your nose, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, right? And you know that we're all supposed to do diaphragmatic breathing, right? But what do they teach us when we grow up? Stick out your chest and pull in your stomach, right? And has anybody ever watched a little baby breathe? Because we naturally breathe diaphragmatically, from our diaphragm. You better know this, Preston, because he knows about singing. That if you watch a little baby, you see their little tummy going up and down, because they're breathing the proper way. But we all learn to shallow breathe, which is not good. And part of it is because everybody always tells us to stand up straight, pull in our stomach, put out our chest. Right? But real meditation is always breathing. So you're breathing in through your nose, and you should be like expanding your stomach so you feel it. So you're saying, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God. And then as you say, have mercy upon me, a sinner, you're breathing out. And some of the monks, I'm sure you've read The Way of the Pilgrim. Oh, you haven't read, okay. It's somebody's book. But some of them, it'll even become linked to their heartbeat. It's their heartbeats. It's becoming part of them. And some of these, you listen to those monks that live on Mount Athos, some of them will just, they will actually be praying it while they're asleep, whether that's possible or not. I mean, they'll be doing manual labor, and it's become so much a part of them that they just keep praying continually. Wild stuff. Wild stuff. Have you ever been able to reach that state? Pretty hard. I don't think. Oh, man. Yeah, just become a Baptist, then we can all be saints. The priesthood of all believers. I've heard about that. Did you talk about that in there? Didn't he get more kind of Buddhist-like towards the end? Or more? That's right. Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Which is not wildly weird or anything.
No.
But I think that all agree with that.
Oh, the Orthodoxy is the most mystical branch of Christianity. Well, you should read a book called The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. Because he was on a road and he would have either become a Zen Buddhist or a Christian. By the end, he becomes a Christian. But he was equally there. He made the point that almost every one of Jesus' teachings is a paradox, if you read it carefully. And that, it's probably not every, but most of it, you must lose your life to gain it. So much of that stuff is spoken paradoxically. All the Beatitudes are paradoxical. Oh, what are you thinking? Oh, you're right to Kierkegaard, okay. Existentialism. But you could call him a romantic, too. I mean, we often think of him as an existentialist. But, yeah. Yeah, that's wild. I've got a whole bunch of notes I took at Kierkegaard. Yeah. Wild stuff. You do have to write something. So, again, he says, now, if this be but a vain belief, all right, if I'm making this all up, this experience that I thought it, but yet, oh, how oft in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of this world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how often in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan why thou wander in the woods? How often has my spirit turned to thee? So he says, you may think I'm making this up, but there were so many times when you know what that means, the fever of this world? Have you ever felt that? Just the madness of it? Everybody always pressing you fast, screaming at you. I think I've told you before, I don't even like watching movies on a regular TV, because what happens is that when the movie's over and you want to when you want to watch the closing credits and listen to the music and kind of meditate on what you've just watched, they won't let you, because what happens on TV? You've seen it? Okay, it gets cut off, and what usually happens is the screen splits in half. The music is gone, because the other half, they're blaring at you what's to come next. Not even necessarily a commercial, just what's coming next. And then the credits start moving at 100 miles an hour. Right? And it's like, no, I want to think of always a fever, and you can feel it hanging on you. This world is so full of noise. And it's gotten noisier and one thing I hated, this was still big when I was a kid. Everybody will always leave the TV on all the time. Like white noise or something. You just couldn't deal without the TV. Just shut the darn TV off. You see that?
I was thinking this morning when I was having breakfast, I wanted to get a book or get my phone
Oh.
and music, and I was thinking, whenever I'm still constantly either reading or thinking,
Oh,
or
that's
always
good.
listening to music, whenever I'm just not doing anything, I always start praying, because that's
Oh,
the
wow.
only thing that my mind, like, you can see that, like, when I'm lying in bed at night, like, just praying, like, whenever I'm not doing something, it's so rare that my mind goes, oh, time to pray.
It's hard. We all get that Protestant work ethic in
It's
us.
kind of a nice thing, but it's not because I spend too much time in prayer. It's because I'm so constantly bombarding myself.
You got to do it. But it is hard to get into that, because, again, the world is always, what is the line from Four Quartets? Distracted by distraction from distraction. One of the Four Quartets. And again, it's a fever. What do you think? You remembering that? Oh, there we go. Good stuff. So again, it's hanging. And okay, now I'll kind of set you up for what's to come. Now he's looking down with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity. Look at these wonderful, odd, but see how they're simple words? They're not, quote, big words, but they're put together in a new way. Sad perplexity. And that itself almost becomes a riddle. A koan, that's the word, Koan. That's what they're called, koan. They're like little riddles that you... By the way, I told you that Bolston will like it because you mentioned fractals. He's obsessed with fractals. You can maybe get him to watch Frozen, because he sings about frozen fractals everywhere or something like that. Yeah, so, but yeah, he just loves fractals. It's really funny. Oh, that's true. Yeah, he would know it. He would probably know it. I think I told you this once. Dr. Bolston used to be our chair for English for a while. And he did a good job. And one time he kept saying, because it's been hard at HBU for the last 15 years, but it's like, come on, folks, we're all in this together. And every time I laugh, because of course I grew up with my kids, grew up on High School Musical. And there's a song, we're all in, and it just, the concept of Bolston watching that movie and singing along was so ludicrous. And of course he was not quoting High School Musical. But every time he said, we're all in this, I said, oh no, I can't see this. And I just had an image of him dancing on, it was frightening. Like imagining your grandmother breakdancing or something. It was frightening. And, there we go. See, that's great. It was a good movie. I really enjoyed it, and I loved the depiction of the crazy lady that was the drama teacher. I thought she was really good. I actually did enjoy that. They even made a movie which was probably unnecessary, but the second one was still not that bad either. But anyway, after that, so we're setting up. So he says, the picture of the mind revives again, while here I stand not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. Only a romantic. I'm not so much enjoying this now, but I know I'm really going to enjoy this when I remember it. You ever do that? I'm making a memory right now.
I was just thinking about that a minute ago, like, I wish I could take this class again. Like,
Yeah, see? So we can do it, right? I'm going to hold on. Okay, well, we'll give you another chance for musicals. Let me see. Who will tie it up with a ribbon and put it in a box for me? So I can see it. Now, you've probably never seen Oliver. You have to see Oliver. It's one of the great musicals. Hey, you got it. It's Who Am I? Who will tie it up in a ribbon and put it in a box so I can see it at my leisure? Anyway. Okay, so we'll talk about next one. What he's going to go on now from this part is he's going to talk, as he looks, he's going to review his life over against Tintern Abbey, as he lived his life over against those places you went to when you were a kid. He's going to see it in his mind, and there's going to be 3 stages. One stage is just in parentheses. It's line 73, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements. What a wonderful way to think of little Ender, but he's a little older, but glad animal movements. That's the earliest stage. Then most of that big verse paragraph is when he was a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, and he was running through and enjoying nature, but directly, right? Didn't have to think about it. It was a direct experience, unmediated. And now the 3rd stage is the older adult, who now is experiencing it in a more mediated way. And what's going to happen in this poem, and the next one that you're going to read, called the Intimations Ode, these are both what are called crisis poems. And Wordsworth is famous for crisis, but it's not a crisis in terms of like your job. It's a perceptual and emotional and sort of spiritual crisis. In this poem, he's going to feel like he's lost that directness that the little boy had. But he's going to find what he calls abundant recompense. I've lost that, but I've gained something better. And when you read Intimations Ode, it's the same thing. It's just going to be on a bigger scale. Right? So just, again, you just have those few poems to read, and then start reading Frankenstein. Yay! And you still have a little while before your paper's due, but it's coming. Okay, but I gave you a very, very detailed prompt. And again, I would encourage you, before you start reading Frankenstein, get out the 2-page handout that's in your course pack, because it talks about what the Byronic hero is. And then if you read that, then while you're reading the book, you can think about that. And, you can decide. I always hate to break up a reading of a novel, but while you're reading, you might jot down things that you may want to talk about in your paper. If we want to just kind of save. I mean, we all need to be efficient these days with everything going crazy. So, you got that all? Hey, I made it. 4:46. Okay.